You shouldn't be here, I said before I even knew who she was. The doorbell had rung 3 times already, polite, patient, like whoever stood outside thought persistence could pass for courage. I almost didn't answer. I don't get visitors anymore. Not the kind who knock gently, anyway. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman, mid-20s, hair pinned back like she wanted to look older. Her hands trembled just enough to betray her composure. That look, the one people get when they've rehearsed a moment too many times and still know it's going to go wrong. When I opened the door, the light from the hallway fell between us like a fault line. "Are you Mrs. Lang?" she asked, voice thin but steady. I didn't answer right away. "Who's asking?" "My name's Clara." She hesitated. "Clara Rhodes. I think I'm your niece." The words hit harder than they had any right to. Niece. It wasn't just the claim, it was the name that followed. Rhodes. My pulse jumped. My sister's married name. The one I'd trained myself not to say for over 2 decades. "I don't have any nieces," I said, too sharp. "You did," she said quietly. "My mother was Anna Rhodes." The air seemed to thin. Anna. The ghost I'd kept buried under routine and distance. The sister who'd vanished with everything, our savings, my husband's trust, the last version of me that believed in people. Clara reached into her jacket and pulled out a small silver key on a worn metal ring. The tag was faded, the engraving almost invisible, but I saw it clearly, Unit 47, Blue Ridge Storage. "She told me to give you this," she said. "Said you deserved the truth." I stared at the key resting in her open palm. It looked ordinary, like it belonged to a locker, a mailbox, anything but the past. The word truth felt heavier than metal. "Come in," I said finally. Inside, the air was still and neat, too neat, maybe. The kind of clean that hides what can't be fixed. She stepped in carefully, eyes flicking from one wall to another, like she expected to find ghosts hanging beside the framed photos. Maybe she did. We sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. 2 mugs of coffee, one steady hand and one trembling. "So," I said, "you're here because your mother wanted to send me a key?" Clara nodded. "Before she died, she said you'd understand once you opened it." I almost laughed. Understand what? That she stole my life? Her eyes softened, not pity, just something quieter. She said it wasn't what it looked like. "People always say that when they've already done it," I murmured. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the clock ticking above the fridge, a sound I'd stopped hearing years ago. Then Clara said, almost whispering, "She wanted you to know why." I looked at her, really looked. The eyes, gray-green, same as Anna's. The same quiet sorrow. But there was something else there too, conviction. "You look like her," I said finally. "I know," she said. "That's why I almost didn't come." Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere down the hall, a door slammed. The sound made her flinch, but I didn't move. I kept my gaze on the key between us. I'd spent half my life trying to lock that story away. Now it had found its way back to my doorstep, polite, trembling, and determined. What she said next made my stomach turn cold. "She told me someone else took the money, and that you were never supposed to find out." But secrets buried for 25 years don't stay quiet forever, especially when someone decides to dig them up. The drive started in silence. Not the kind that feels peaceful, but the kind that hums between 2 people who have too much to say and no idea where to start. Clara sat in the passenger seat, fingers tracing the key on her lap like it might tell her what to do next. Every few miles, I caught her glancing at me, then pretending she wasn't. She had her mother's nervous habits, the small, involuntary gestures that made truth visible before words did. The road unspooled in long gray ribbons through the empty hills. November light hung low, thin as old paper. The sky looked like it might rain but couldn't quite commit. I'd been down that highway 100 times, though never toward anything that mattered. It led past towns that smelled like gasoline and fried food, places where time didn't move, it just collected. Halfway through the drive, I said quietly, "Your mother ever tell you why she left?" Clara hesitated. "Only that she had to. She said if she stayed, someone would have destroyed both of you." "That's convenient." I kept my eyes on the road. "She ruined me to save me." "How noble." "She didn't sound proud of it," Clara said softly. "She sounded scared." That word. Scared. I hadn't let myself imagine Anna as afraid. Angry, yes. Reckless, definitely. But fear didn't fit the version of her I'd built to survive. The rain finally came, light at first, then steady. It blurred the landscape until everything looked half-dreamed. Clara said, "She told me to tell you it wasn't over. That the truth was still out there." I almost smiled. "You make it sound like a riddle." "Maybe it is." For a long stretch, neither of us spoke again. The sound of the wipers filled the space where the past should have stayed buried. At a gas station outside Blue Ridge, we stopped for coffee. The kind that tastes like burnt dust but keeps your hands warm. Clara paid, despite my protest. She was stubborn in small ways, like she'd inherited that trait through blood instead of example. When we got back into the car, she said, "She made me promise to find you. Said you were the only one who could finish what she started." Finish what? She didn't say. Of course she didn't. Anna always built her stories out of half-truths and vanished before you could demand the other half. The rain had eased when the road turned off toward the old industrial park where Blue Ridge Storage sat. The sign leaned to one side, letters flaking like old paint on a gravestone. Rows of orange metal doors stood behind a chain-link fence, stretching into silence. Clara looked out the window, uneasy. "It doesn't look like much." "It never does," I said. I parked near the gate, killed the engine, and just sat there. The air smelled like wet asphalt and rust. My reflection stared back at me in the windshield, older, smaller, but still braced for impact. She held the key tighter, then looked at me. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I opened the door, stepped out into the drizzle, and said, "Want's got nothing to do with it." The wind carried a faint metallic scent, like old coins and rain-soaked secrets. The kind that never rust all the way through, just deep enough to stain your hands when you touch them. And as we walked toward Unit 47, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't afraid of what I'd find inside. I was afraid of what I wouldn't. Because sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it just changes the shape of your cage. The gate creaked open like it had been waiting. Rows of storage units lined both sides, dull orange doors sweating rainwater, numbers half-faded, padlocks catching the weak afternoon light. Each one looked the same, but my gut recognized 47 before I saw it. I stopped a few feet away. The gravel crunched under my boots, small and sharp. Clara stood beside me, holding the key like it might bite. She looked pale, the rain painting strands of hair across her face. "This is it," she said quietly. "Yeah," I murmured. "It always was." I reached out and touched the cold metal door. The texture was rough, flaking paint over rust. 25 years of weather. 25 years of silence. The kind of silence you have to feed to keep it alive. Clara hesitated, then said, "She told me not to open it alone. She said you'd understand why." I did. I didn't know how, but I did. My hand was steady when I took the key from her, though my heart wasn't. The lock clicked, small sound, big memory. The kind that echoes louder inside your chest than outside your ears. I lifted the latch, rolled the door up, and felt the air change. Dust swirled in the dim light, turning every movement into a ghost. The smell hit first, paper, rust, and time. Inside was a single steel cabinet, waist-high, with a sheet thrown over it. A folding chair beside it. Nothing else. It was cleaner than I expected. No chaos. No clutter. Just purpose. Clara stepped forward, voice low. "She must have kept it this way all these years." I didn't answer. My throat was too dry. I pulled the sheet off, slow enough for the dust to rise in lazy spirals. The cabinet beneath was olive green, same model the Air Force used back in the 90s. The sight of it made my stomach twist. Clara crouched beside it, eyes tracing the faded serial numbers. You recognize it? I used to keep our pay ledgers in one just like this, I said. When we still trusted each other. There was a small note taped to the top. Handwritten, curling at the corners. One word, sorry. I stared at it until the letters blurred. My hand shook when I reached for the top drawer. Inside were manila folders, all neatly labeled by year, 2000, 2001, 2002, right up to the present. Each one was sealed. Each one carried my sister's handwriting. Clara whispered, she never stopped coming back here. No, I said, she just came alone. I lifted the folder marked 2000 and felt how heavy it was. Inside were receipts, printed emails, old photos, and a single envelope with my name. The moment I saw it, the air left my lungs. That handwriting, those looping letters, it was her. Not the memory of her, not the ghost, but her. Clara watched me carefully. You want me to? No, my voice came out sharper than I meant. If there's a ghost in here, it's mine to deal with. I opened the envelope. The paper was fragile, edges yellowed. The first line was short. If you're reading this, then you've already forgiven me more than I deserve. My knees almost gave. Forgiven? Not yet. Maybe never. But I kept reading, because hate only gets you so far before you need answers. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the hills. Clara stood near the doorway, arms folded, watching me read a letter written by the woman who'd ruined my life and maybe, just maybe, tried to save it. By the time I reached the last line, the page was trembling in my hands. They made me take the fall, but I took something from them too. What's left of it is in the next drawer. Don't trust anyone who smiles when they say your name. I folded the paper carefully, set it down, and looked at Clara. Her expression said everything. Fear. Hope. Guilt that wasn't hers. We both turned toward the second drawer. And in that moment, I understood, whatever we found next wasn't just going to explain the past. It was going to decide what came after. The second drawer stuck halfway out, like it didn't want to remember. I tugged harder until the rust gave up and the metal screeched open, the sound sharp enough to raise goosebumps. Inside were more envelopes, thick and weathered. Some were bound together with twine. Others had corners burned or smudged, as if someone had tried to erase the past but couldn't quite finish the job. On top of the stack sat a small black cassette recorder. A sticky note was taped to it. Press play only when you're ready. Clara glanced at me. Are we ready? No, I said. But we'll do it anyway. I pressed the button. The tape word sputtered, and then came alive with static, then a voice, faint but familiar, like it was speaking through water. Lena, if you're hearing this, then I failed to fix what I broke. Anna's voice. Older, rougher, but hers. My hand froze on the recorder. I didn't run because of the money, the voice continued. I ran because I saw something I wasn't supposed to. Keller Systems, Project Redline, they were using our accounts to hide military funds. When I refused to sign off, they made it look like I did. I glanced at Clara, who stared at the recorder as if it might start bleeding. I know you won't believe me, Anna's voice said, quieter now. But I didn't take your life to ruin it. I took it because it was the only way to keep you alive. They were watching you too. Then silence, a small, final click. I sat there for a long time, the kind of stillness where even your pulse feels intrusive. Clara whispered, "Do you think it's real?" I think, I said slowly, that my sister just reached out from the grave to tell me she wasn't the villain. I opened one of the folders beneath the recorder. Inside were photocopied memos, official seals, and stamped contracts. Keller Systems. Department of Defense. Dates that matched the year she vanished. In the margins, her handwriting again. He threatened you by name. That line hit harder than the rest. I remembered the man she'd reported to, Colonel Grant Mercer. Charming, ruthless, the kind of man who wore integrity like a borrowed suit. Clara picked up a photo from the pile, a grainy snapshot of Anna standing beside Mercer at a conference table. Anna's smile looked polite, hollow. His didn't. He's still alive, I muttered. I saw his name in a news piece last year, consultant for a defense firm. Clara's voice trembled. Then he knows you're reading this. I looked at the open door of the storage unit, rain flickering in the light. Every instinct I'd buried in 20 years of military service began to stir, that gut-deep sense that you're being watched. I reached over, pressed the tape recorder's stop button, and slid the cassette into my jacket pocket. We're done here, I said. But we've got what we need. We shut the drawer, closed the door, and locked it again, but the air still felt wrong, as if something had followed us out. When we reached the car, Clara kept glancing into the side mirrors, restless. You think someone's still? Yes, I said. And that means we're finally getting close. The rain had stopped, but the world still looked wet and gray, like the truth was trying to crawl out from under the weight of years. And somewhere out there, I knew Mercer was watching, waiting for a secret he thought had died with my sister. He was about to learn what it meant to underestimate the wrong woman. The highway back from Blue Ridge was empty, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt watched. Every headlight in the rearview mirror looked like a tail. Every turn signal glowed too long. I'd driven through war zones quieter than this stretch of road. Clara was quiet, clutching the recorder like it was holy. The tape inside had weight now, a voice preserved against time and guilt. Anna's voice. My sister's voice. Do you believe her? Clara asked finally, breaking the silence. I kept my eyes on the yellow lines bleeding past beneath the rain. Belief isn't the problem. Proof is. She had documents. Documents don't stop bullets, I said flatly. If Mercer's still alive, he'll have spent 25 years making sure her story never sees daylight. The words sounded colder than I meant. Maybe because I was talking to myself as much as to her. We stopped for gas outside Marlin Creek. The attendant was a kid, couldn't have been older than 20. His name tag said Eli. He smiled politely, asked where we were headed. I told him nowhere. He looked confused but didn't press. Smart kid. While Clara went inside for coffee, I popped the glove compartment open. Inside was my old service pistol, disassembled but clean. Habit, not paranoia. I hadn't fired it in years, but my fingers still remembered the weight of the grip, the smell of oil and brass. When she came back, she caught me reassembling it. You think we'll need that? I clicked the magazine into place. Hope not. We drove the rest of the way in silence, the world sliding by in wet shadows. My mind ran through names, faces, years. Keller Systems. Redline. Colonel Grant Mercer. Each one another match waiting for a spark. Back at my apartment, I poured 2 whiskeys and turned the recorder over in my hands. You ready? I asked. Clara nodded, but her eyes said no. I pressed play again. The tape hissed, then Anna's voice filled the room. They told me to sign off on fake contracts, aircraft parts that didn't exist, supply chains to nowhere. When I refused, Mercer smiled. He said, then maybe your sister will be more cooperative. That's when I knew what kind of man he was. My throat tightened. I could almost see that smirk again, the same one he'd worn at every briefing, every meeting where the truth was just another line item to manipulate. Anna continued, I tried to report him. The report disappeared. The next morning, my access codes were revoked. I was labeled a traitor. Then her voice softened, trembling for the first time. If you ever hear this, Lena, find Mercer. He'll pretend he doesn't remember me, but he will. Ask him about Project Redline. And tell him I kept the receipts. The tape clicked off. Clara stared at me, wide-eyed. Project Redline? I nodded slowly. It's military shorthand. Black budget operations. No oversight, no paper trail, unless someone was foolish enough to keep one. You mean Mom? She wasn't foolish, I said quietly. She was thorough. I stood, went to the small desk by the window, and booted up my old laptop. The machine wheezed like it resented being woken. I typed Grant Mercer Keller Systems into the search bar. His face appeared within seconds, older now, heavier, the metals traded for boardroom confidence. Senior Defense Consultant, Atlas Strategic Holdings. There it was. The same self-satisfied smile. Still alive. Still untouchable. Clara leaned over my shoulder. So what do we do? I studied his photo, the gleam in his eyes that said he'd forgotten the people he'd broken on his way up. We remind him. Outside, thunder rumbled again, distant, slow, like a warning. I closed the laptop and said, tomorrow, we start digging where he thinks no one will. Because the truth wasn't buried. It was hidden in plain sight, and he'd built his empire on top of it. And when you build something on a lie, all it takes is one crack to bring the whole thing down. Morning came late, gray light seeping through the blinds, the kind that makes time feel suspended. Clara was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with the laptop open, eyes bloodshot but focused. You didn't sleep, I said. She shook her head. Couldn't. I kept thinking about what she said. Don't trust anyone who smiles when they say your name. I poured coffee. The bitter kind. The kind that burned going down but kept you sharp. Your mother had a way of turning paranoia into poetry. Clara looked up. You don't think she was paranoid, do you? I paused. No. She was careful. That's different. The truth was, I'd spent half the night replaying that tape in my head, her voice shaking when she said Mercer's name. That wasn't fear. It was calculation. My sister had known she couldn't win, but she'd still left a map for someone else to finish what she started. And now that map was sitting across the table from me in the form of a tired 23-year-old girl with her mother's eyes. Anything on Mercer? I asked. She turned the laptop toward me. Plenty. He's on 3 defense boards. Consultant for Atlas, advisor for 2 private intelligence firms. Publicly retired, privately rich. Typical. Men like Mercer didn't fade out, they evolved. They shed uniforms for suits, replaced orders with contracts, and called it progress. What about Keller Systems? She clicked a few tabs. They merged 12 years ago with a logistics company. Changed names twice. Now they're Westvale Dynamics. Same board, same logo. Same Mercer. I leaned back, exhaling through my nose. He's still feeding off the same beast. Clara scrolled again. There's more. Someone filed a whistleblower complaint against Westvale in 2015, anonymous. It got buried under national security exemptions. Sounds familiar, I said. Your mother's ghost has company. We sat in silence for a while. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space where anger usually lived. I'd spent years learning how to control rage, to pack it neat and disciplined, like a weapon you only draw when necessary. But now that discipline felt fragile. Clara broke the quiet. You think he knows who you are? I smiled faintly. He remembers every name he stepped on. That's how men like him measure success. I finished my coffee and stood. Get dressed. We're going to San Laredo. She blinked. Why? Mercer's consulting firm has an office there. I know someone who used to work in procurement, a friend who still owes me a favor. The look on her face said she wanted to argue but didn't. Smart girl. We drove out an hour later. The air felt thick, like even the weather knew something was shifting. The road stretched long and empty, cutting through flatland and dry fields. About 30 miles from San Laredo, Clara said, you ever think maybe Mom knew you'd come for him? She didn't know, I said quietly. She counted on it. When we reached the city limits, the skyline shimmered in the heat, all glass and ambition. The kind of place built by people who believed consequences were negotiable. I parked outside a nondescript building, gray concrete, tinted windows, and a discreet brass plate, Atlas Strategic Holdings. Clara read it out loud, almost whispering. "He's really here." "Maybe not today," I said. "But his people are. And they're loyal to their paychecks, not their principles." We walked in. The lobby smelled like disinfectant and power. Receptionists smiled the way predators bare their teeth. I flashed an old military ID and said I was meeting with procurement. No one asked why. While we waited, Clara leaned close. "You sure about this?" "No," I said. "That's how I know it's worth doing." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. The woman who stepped out wasn't who I expected. Gray suit, sharp eyes, someone who'd learned to read rooms before speaking. "Ms. Lang," she asked. I nodded. "Mr. Mercer can't meet you today," she said smoothly. "But he did ask me to deliver a message." Her tone was polite, but something in her smile turned my blood cold. Clara stiffened beside me. "What message?" she asked. The woman handed me a small white envelope, crisp and unmarked. "Mr. Mercer said you'd recognize the handwriting." I took it, heart hammering once, then twice, like it had skipped a beat. Because she was right. I did. It was my sister's. And below her name, a single sentence written in her familiar looping hand. "He's not the only one who kept receipts." For a long moment, I couldn't move. The envelope felt warm, like it had a pulse of its own. My sister's handwriting, 25 years after she died, staring up at me from a piece of white paper that shouldn't exist. Clara whispered, "Is that?" "Yes." My voice was low, steady. "It's hers." The woman in the gray suit stood like a statue, expression unreadable. She didn't blink, didn't fidget. The kind of stillness you only learn from years of surveillance or guilt. "Who gave this to you?" I asked. "Mr. Mercer requested I deliver it personally," she said. "He said you'd understand." Understand? That word again. The one Anna had used in her letter, her tape, her last breath. Clara looked from me to the envelope. "Open it," she whispered. "Not here." My instincts screamed it. Mercer wanted me to open it where he could watch, see the reaction, measure the damage. So I slipped it into my coat pocket and smiled at the woman, the same professional smile I used to wear when I knew I was being lied to. "Tell Mr. Mercer I appreciate the message." She nodded once, and that was it. The conversation ended without ending. We walked out into the heat, the heavy kind that sticks to your lungs. Clara spoke first. "What do you think's inside?" "I don't know," I said. "But I know what it's meant to do." "What's that?" "Shake me." We drove in silence again, the envelope burning a hole in my pocket. My mind wouldn't stop circling the same impossible thought, how could Mercer have something with Anna's handwriting? Unless she'd sent him something before she disappeared. Or worse, unless he'd taken something she wrote and kept it, waiting for the day he'd need to remind me who was in control. By the time we got home, the sun was down and the sky was the color of old bruises. I turned on one lamp, sat at the kitchen table, and set the envelope between us. "Now?" Clara asked. "Now," I said. I tore it open carefully, like I was defusing a bomb. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper. No date, no signature. Just 10 words written in Anna's looping, deliberate script. "You never asked who told him where to find you." My throat went dry. Clara frowned. "What does that mean?" I stared at the line, my pulse pounding so hard I could hear it. That handwriting, every curve of every letter, was hers. But the message, that was Mercer's voice. That was his game. "He's trying to turn us against her," I said. "Against each other." Clara's voice trembled. "But she's dead." "How could he?" He doesn't need her alive. Just her words. She leaned forward, desperate. You think she wrote this for him? No, I said. He found it. Maybe something she wrote years ago, a draft, a note. And he's using it now, like bait. Bait for what? For me. I stood, pacing the narrow kitchen. My reflection in the window looked like a ghost with unfinished business. He wants me off balance, doubting her, doubting myself. That's how men like him survive, they turn loyalty into leverage. Clara stared at the paper. He knows we found the storage unit. Of course he does. He wanted us to. I met her eyes, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us thickened with something I hadn't felt in years, purpose. This isn't about the past anymore, I said. He's warning us. And that means he's scared. Clara swallowed hard. Scared of what? Of what your mother left behind. I folded the note once, then again, until it was small enough to disappear into my fist. Outside, thunder growled in the distance, low, restless, familiar. Clara whispered, so what now? I looked at her, calm and cold. Now we stop letting him write the story. Because if Mercer wanted control, he was about to lose it, word by word, truth by truth. And by the time he realized what we were really after, it would already be too late. I didn't sleep that night. The clock kept slicing the darkness into thin, uneven pieces. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that single line in Anna's handwriting, you never asked who told him where to find you. By dawn, the note was still on the table, a small, cruel reminder that Mercer was ahead of me again. I'd spent half my life burying his name, now he was using my sisters to resurrect his own power. Clara came out of the guest room, eyes puffy but sharp. You didn't sleep, she said. Didn't plan to, I answered. Sleep's for people who've made peace with ghosts. She sat down, rubbing her hands together. You think he's bluffing? No. Men like Mercer don't bluff. They calculate. I picked up my phone and dialed an old number, one I hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. Hayes, it said. Peterson, I replied. You still owe me from Kandahar. He chuckled dryly. You kept count, huh? What do you need? Records, I said. Keller Systems. Operation Redline. Colonel Grant Mercer. The pause that followed wasn't hesitation. It was caution. That file's blacker than night. You know what you're asking for? Yeah. I'm done being polite about the truth. He exhaled slowly. Give me a day. Maybe 2. You've got 12 hours. I hung up. Clara stared at me, half in awe, half in fear. You really think your old contacts can find something after all these years? They never stopped looking. They just stopped saying it out loud. I poured another coffee, black and mean, then opened my laptop. I needed leverage. Proof that Mercer's empire wasn't untouchable. The files from the storage unit had gaps in years of silence where the paper trail ended too cleanly. But silence leaves fingerprints. Keller Systems had rebranded twice, first to Keller Dynamics, then Westvale, each time shedding employees, shifting ownership, moving guilt around like a shell game. But Mercer's name appeared in all of them, disguised under consulting roles and board advisories. He's been laundering his own history, I said. Clara leaned over my shoulder. How do we prove it? We find the one person who helped him do it. The thought hit me as I said it. There was always a paper keeper, someone invisible who made the signatures line up, the lies look official. I searched internal memos archived online and froze when I saw it, a recurring name, buried in the fine print of Keller's early contracts. Audit Oversight, L. Serrano. Who's that? Clara asked. An accountant. She worked for Keller in '99. Same year your mother disappeared. I looked her up, nothing for 20 years, then a single mention in a public record from a small town outside El Paso. Clara frowned. You think she's still alive? If she isn't, I said, we'll know why. By noon we were back on the road. The sky hung low, heavy with dust and promise. The town of Enoch wasn't much, a handful of gas stations, a diner, and streets that looked half abandoned. We found her address easily, a faded house on a corner lot, curtains drawn, mailbox rusted shut. Clara hesitated. You sure this is smart? No, I said. But it's necessary. I knocked. The sound echoed too loud against the quiet. A few seconds later, the door cracked open. An older woman stood there, small frame, silver hair pulled tight, eyes sharp enough to cut through decades. Yes, she said cautiously. Ms. Serrano, I said. My name's Lena Lang. I'm looking into Keller Systems, and Grant Mercer. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes flickered, recognition, fear, maybe both. I don't talk about Keller, she said. I'm not here to make you talk, I replied. I'm here to listen. She studied me for a moment, then stepped aside. 5 minutes. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old paper. Boxes were stacked everywhere, neat, labeled by year. She poured 2 cups of instant coffee and sat opposite me at a small table. I thought I was done with that name, she said. So did my sister, I replied quietly. It didn't end well for her either. Her eyes lifted to mine. Abigail Rhodes? I froze. You knew her? She was brave, Serrano said softly. Too brave for men like Mercer. Clara leaned forward. What did he do to her? Serrano hesitated, then whispered, what he always does, he buried her under other people's signatures. She stood, walked to a box marked 2000, and pulled out a single folder. Inside was a copy of a memo stamped classified. She slid it toward me. I read the first line, and the world tilted. Internal notice, Subject A. Rhodes, security breach confirmed. Source, internal contact within logistics division. Clara's voice was a whisper. Internal contact? Serrano nodded slowly. Someone she trusted. Someone who told Mercer exactly where to find her. The words blurred on the page. My pulse thundered in my ears. I looked up at Serrano. Who? She hesitated, then whispered the name. And it wasn't Mercer's. It was someone I'd once called friend. For a heartbeat, I couldn't speak. The name hung in the air between us, small and ordinary, yet heavy enough to tilt the room. Say that again, I whispered. Serrano didn't flinch. It was Commander Richard Hale. He gave Mercer her location. The sound of his name cracked open 25 years of silence. Hale, my CO, my mentor, the man who'd toasted Frank and me at our wedding, who'd helped me pack up our house after Anna vanished. The man who told me to let it go, when no one else would say her name. Clara looked between us, confused. Who's Hale? My commanding officer, I said slowly. Back then. He was Mercer's liaison. Serrano nodded. That's right. He passed reports between Keller and the Air Force. He signed the notice that labeled your sister a traitor. My hands curled into fists. He told me he tried to protect her. He said the evidence was too strong. Her eyes were full of pity. He didn't try. He executed the order. The air in the room felt thick, humming like electricity before a storm. Clara shifted uneasily. Why would he do that? Because Mercer needed someone with clearance to make it official, Serrano said. And Hale was ambitious. He knew which side paid better. It all clicked into place, every silence, every gentle deflection, every I'm sorry, Lena, but it's over. Hale hadn't just betrayed Anna. He'd buried her to save himself. I stood abruptly. Do you know where he is now? Serrano hesitated, then opened another folder. Inside was a faded clipping from a local paper, a photo of a man in a crisp suit shaking hands with a senator. Richard Hale, defense contract consultant, Arlington, Virginia. He's still alive, I said. My voice sounded calm, but it wasn't. It was controlled. Serrano watched me closely. You're not going after him. I'm going to ask him a question, I said. Same one Anna never got to. She shook her head. People like Mercer and Hale, they don't answer questions. They end them. I've survived worse endings, I said, slipping the memo into my coat. Clara stood too. We're leaving? Yes. Serrano caught my arm before I reached the door. Her grip was stronger than it looked. You think revenge brings peace? It doesn't. It only reminds you how much they took. I met her eyes. Peace isn't the goal. Outside, the air was dry and merciless. The desert wind cut across the lot as I unlocked the car. Clara slid in quietly beside me. She didn't ask where we were going. She didn't have to. We drove until the town vanished behind us, the horizon blurring into copper and shadow. Clara finally spoke. You knew him well, didn't you? I trusted him, I said. That's worse. The silence that followed was long, heavy. I could feel her watching me, trying to read what kind of storm was building behind my calm. When we stopped at a rest area, I stepped out and leaned against the car, staring at the empty road ahead. You don't have to come, I said. I'm not leaving, she replied. I almost smiled. You sound like her. Clara stepped closer. Then maybe that's a good thing. The sun was sinking fast, a dying ember bleeding across the desert. I could feel the moment shifting, tightening, pulling everything toward one final reckoning. I turned to her. Once we start this, there's no going back. I know. Her voice was steady now. Not her mother's, not mine, her own. The last of the light flickered across the windshield, catching my reflection beside hers. Two women bound by a truth neither of us asked for. I started the engine. The road ahead was long, straight, and waiting. Hale's in Arlington, I said quietly. Clara nodded, fastening her seatbelt. Then let's make sure he remembers who taught him loyalty. As we drove into the deepening dusk, I realized something I hadn't before. Mercer might have started this, but Hale had made it personal. And when betrayal wears a familiar face, revenge stops being a choice. It becomes instinct. We reached Arlington just before dawn, the kind of gray morning that doesn't belong to any particular day, when time itself feels suspended. The city was quiet, washed in a dim silver haze. I parked 2 blocks away from Hale's townhouse, red brick, neat hedges, curtains drawn tight. The kind of home people build when they've convinced themselves the past can't find them. Clara sat beside me, holding the folder from Serrano's box. What are you going to say to him? I'm going to give him a chance to lie, I said. And see how long it takes before he remembers. I already know the truth. She stared at the house. And if he doesn't talk? Then he'll listen. I stepped out of the car. My boots crunched over wet gravel, the air smelled like rain that hadn't started yet. The kind of stillness before a storm, heavy, electric. When Hale opened the door, he looked almost exactly the same, grayer hair, deeper lines, but the same calculating eyes. For a second, I saw the man who once called me kid, and meant it like a compliment. Then I remembered the signature on that memo. Lena, he said, too warmly. I'll be damned. Been a long time. 25 years, I said. You look good for a man with ghosts. His smile faltered, just slightly. Come in. The living room was tastefully sterile, walls lined with plaques, photos, a folded flag framed above the mantel. The kind of decor that screams honor but whispers guilt. He poured coffee like it was a peace offering. I didn't drink. You always did know how to find trouble, he said, settling into his chair. So, what brings you here? Nostalgia? I dropped the memo on the table between us. His name was right there, under Mercer's. Recognition, I said. He looked at it once, then back at me. You've been digging where you shouldn't. I learned from the best, I said softly. Tell me, did Mercer pay you well for my sister's life? His jaw tightened, but he stayed composed. You don't know the full story. Then enlighten me. He sighed, leaned back, tried to reclaim control. Your sister was reckless. She was going to expose classified programs, things that could have crippled national security. I did what I had to do. By giving Mercer her location. His eyes hardened. She wasn't innocent, Lena. None of us were. The calm in his voice was what made my hands shake. Not rage, control. He believed what he said, or had rehearsed it long enough to make it sound true. I stood slowly. You don't get to rewrite this. He rose too, the years melting off his posture. You think vengeance changes anything? She's still dead. You're still broken. Mercer's still untouchable. I stepped closer, until our reflections merged in the window behind him. You're wrong about one thing. He tilted his head. Oh. I smiled faintly. Mercer's not untouchable. He just hasn't been touched properly yet. For the first time, I saw fear flicker behind his eyes. It was brief, but it was real. He tried to cover it with a smirk. You're playing a dangerous game. Good, I said. He taught me the rules. When I turned to leave, he called after me. Lena, you walk down this road, you won't come back. I paused at the doorway. That's the point. Outside, Clara was waiting in the car, eyes wide. Well? He talked, I said. Enough? More than he meant to. She looked past me, toward the house. He's scared. He should be. I got in, started the engine, and pulled into the empty street. The sun was just breaking through the clouds, thin light cutting through gray. Clara stared at me. So what now? I didn't answer right away. My gaze stayed fixed on the road ahead, where the horizon shimmered with something sharp and final. Because Mercer's name wasn't just another ghost in the file. It was a storm still waiting to land. And Hale had just confirmed where to aim it. By the time the sun rose high enough to burn the fog off Arlington's streets, I had already decided how it would end. Not with noise. Not with spectacle. But with truth, measured, undeniable, and lethal in its simplicity. Clara sat beside me as we drove, the wind cutting through the half-open window. She was quiet, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was focus, the kind that comes when you realize the story isn't just about someone you lost, but about what you're still willing to risk. I've been thinking, she said softly. What if Mom left something more than papers and tapes? I glanced at her. What do you mean? She said she took something from them too. What if she meant data? Something Mercer couldn't afford to surface. It made sense. Anna had been meticulous, paranoid in a way that made her dangerous to liars. Then it's hidden somewhere he can't destroy, I said. Clara nodded. Somewhere we can find it. I pulled into a diner off Route 31, the kind with chipped mugs and a jukebox that hadn't worked in decades. We sat in a corner booth, two ghosts in daylight. While we waited for coffee, Clara unfolded the list of storage payments from Anna's files. There were dozens, most under false names, but one stood out. Eleanor Voss. Blue Ridge Unit 47A. Your mother used her maiden name for 47, I said. But Voss, that was my grandmother's. So there's another unit, Clara whispered. Looks that way. She smiled, almost despite herself. You think it's still there? Maybe. But if Mercer knows about 47, he'll be watching 47A. The waitress set our coffee down, and for a moment, the world felt almost normal, two people sharing caffeine and secrets over chipped porcelain. But my mind was already elsewhere, drawing lines between old names and new debts. Clara leaned forward. If we find what she hid, what then? Then we use it, I said. Not for revenge. For exposure. You think the truth will bring him down? I stirred my coffee. The truth doesn't bring men like Mercer down. But it makes them bleed in public. And for men like him, that's worse. After we paid, I called Peterson again. He answered on the first ring. "You're not going to like what I found," he said. "Try me. Project Redline wasn't shut down after your sister died. It was renamed and privatized. Guess who's on the board? Mercer. Mercer and someone else. Commander Richard Hale." I froze. "He's still in bed with him?" Peterson hesitated. "He's been funding Mercer's contracts for years. They built an entire shell network under Atlas. Money moving through veterans' charities, consulting firms, all fake." "Send me everything," I said. "It's encrypted, Lena. You'll need clearance." "I wrote the clearance system," I said coldly. "Just send it." He exhaled. "I'll regret this." "You already do." I hung up. Clara watched me. "They're still partners." "Which means," I said, "we're done asking questions." We drove back toward DC, the highway gleaming under the hard noon light. Every mile felt heavier than the last. Hale's warning echoed in my head, "You won't come back from this." He was right. I didn't want to. Clara broke the silence. "If this gets dangerous." "It already is. I mean for me." I glanced at her. "You're your mother's daughter. You've already chosen your side." She nodded once, resolute. "Then let's finish it." By the time we reached the edge of the city, Peterson's file had arrived. I opened it on the laptop while the car idled at a red light. Streams of code and PDF links filled the screen, transaction logs, signatures, offshore accounts, and one final folder labeled a Phoenix. I clicked it open. Inside were classified documents, unredacted. Testimony. Video files. One dated only 6 months ago, Mercer interview, Atlas Holdings, June 12. The transcript began with a question from a journalist, long buried in some small military blog. "Do you believe your past actions ever endangered civilians, Colonel Mercer?" His answer was smooth, almost bored. "No. But I do regret the people who misunderstood my work." And below that, an attached image, surveillance stills from a private hangar, time-stamped, showing Mercer shaking hands with Hale. 2 ghosts still feeding the same machine. I looked at Clara. He lied about retiring. Her jaw tightened. "So we tell the world." "Not yet," I said, eyes narrowing. "First, we make him tell me. Because there's a moment before every downfall, a quiet space between power and panic, when the guilty still think they're in control. And I was going to make sure Mercer lived long enough to feel that moment stretch into forever." The hearing room smelled like old paper and new cameras, a cold, metallic scent that settled under your skin. Lights made the paint on the walls look clinical, microphones leaned forward like curious insects. Reporters muttered behind notepads. Someone somewhere clicked a camera, and the sound felt obscene and holy at once. I sat in the second row, hands folded around a thin leather folder. My palms were dry. I'd rehearsed nothing. Rehearsals are for people who need drama. I had facts, procedure, and the patient kind of patience that comes from long years of waiting. Mercer entered like a man who expected the world to part for him. He walked steady, suit immaculate, the kind of man whose smile had been his currency. When he saw me, it flinched, just a fraction, a guard slipping. His breath hitched the way mine used to before a combat drop. He tried to settle it with a practiced inhale and a small, false smile. Kevin Adler began a steady, precise, laying out the case in public language that couldn't be classified away. Tape from the storage unit played mid-hearing, Anna's voice crackling across the speakers. The room leaned in as if the words might rearrange the air. Then Peterson testified, sober and blunt, matching lines in the ledger to offshore transfers. Branson read aloud emails that linked Mercer's consulting invoices to shell companies. Serrano's testimony was quieter but lethal. She read the internal notice and the name she'd kept hidden for years, and it landed like a verdict. When the evidence package had been given to the clerk, it unfurled like a map everyone could read. Accounts frozen. Boards asked to step down. An inspector general opened a file on the spot. Mercer's attendance faltered. He searched faces, looking for rescue, for the old networks that had once protected him, but the networks were unstitched now. Public outrage had a way of pulling the thread. I never said his name with anger. I watched him shrink in increments, the way his jaw trembled, how a finger tapped a rhythm on the armrest, the tiny, animal panic in his eyes when he realized the ledger couldn't be erased. People around him cleared their throats, his allies texted in circles. The cameras held his face as if to catalog the exact moment a man discovered he was mortal. After the hearing, the press swarmed. I walked down the marble steps with Clara at my side. Reporters called my name, but I kept my pace measured. I felt oddly light, like straps had been cut. The world had decided to look, it had decided to listen. There were consequences, not immediate retribution with gongs and theater, but the slow, inevitable legal unspooling, indictments, frozen assets, resignations, a public acknowledgement of a life wrongly taken. Anna's name was read into records with respect. A medal was posthumously pinned to a folded flag. People I hadn't spoken to in decades sent messages with small, awkward apologies. They were tiny things, but they fit into the place left by absence, like stones filling a hollow. That night, back in a motel with a view of a rain-slick street, I opened the last envelope Anna had left me. Inside was a single line she'd written years before, "Don't let them make you small again." I folded the paper, smoothed the creases with my thumb, and put it back in my pocket. I didn't gloat. I offered no triumphant speech. Power made a different sound, a steady exhale, the quiet settling after a storm. Clara slept, finally untroubled, the way someone sleeps when their inheritance is truth rather than lies. I walked to the window and watched the city breathe under sodium lamps, ordinary and honest in its small lights. They had taught me how to be unseen. I chose, in the end, to be unavoidable. They called me nothing once, I left them with what they could no longer deny.